You're watching ITV Live. My name is Lasuba Memo, the program host. Today, South Sudan joins the rest of the international members of the international community in the campaign for 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. This year's global theme is Orange the World and Violence Against Women. Talking about international community, I'm privileged to be speaking to the director of USAID in South Sudan, Haben Cruz Hubbard, and also experts who are actually implementing partners of USAID. We'll get to know about that, but why talk about gender-based violence? As we know, in South Sudan, the issue of gender-based violence is critical. It's actually widespread in the country. You may have been following stories that iRadio has been bringing out to you of cases of gender-based violence, including sexual violence against women. Now, South Sudan has now instituted a gender-based violence code, and you may have seen a number of stories of men being actually sentenced for committing crimes against women. And today, let's discuss this. Let's get to the bottom of this, why gender-based violence is widespread in South Sudan, and also get to know what USAID is doing in the country in the fight against gender-based violence. It's good having you in the studios of iRadio. Haben Cruz Hubbard, USAID South Sudan Mission Director.
Good morning, Memo. It's a pleasure to be here. My first name is Haven. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm also joined by Jill Morris, Chief of Party, of doing a program called Sheja Salam, Support Salam, which is also a USAID implementing a project in the country. Jill Morris, it's good having you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Very happy to be here.
Yes, and let's talk about this in a short while. Let me get to also know, actually introduce to you Kepa Dima, who is a Deputy Chief of Party, Resilience Through Agriculture in South Sudan, which is also USAID implementing a partner. It's good having you.
Thank you for having me.
Let's get to the discussion straight away. And the question to all of you, my guest, is today we know it is actually the start of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. And what does this period of activism mean to us?
Sure, I'm happy to address that. So, as you mentioned, the International Day for the Elimination of Elimination of Violence Against Women starts this Thursday on November 25th, and it extends for 16 days through December 10th, which is recognized as International Human Rights Day. And the reason for that is really to link violence against women and human rights as fundamental issues. And so over the course of those 16 days, there will be a series of activities, not only in South Sudan, but internationally in countries around the world. But the purpose is really to raise awareness, fundamentally, that violence against women is also a violation of human rights. And all of the issues that we need to look at as a society and through our projects to try and address that problem.
Jill Morris, what's your take?
Thank you. In addition to what the mission director said, I think what's really important is to, in raising awareness, we also want to talk about the negative effects that gender-based violence has on not only women and girls, but also men and boys and families and communities as a whole. It affects everybody negatively. And I think it's also a time, it's not easy to discuss, but it's to talk about these issues, to know that it shouldn't be a taboo to speak about these things. And in terms of survivors, we want to make sure that survivors feel like they're not alone, that we're there with them, and that it's not something that they should be blaming themselves. And we're working towards finding a solution for everyone.
One of these is actually to encourage people to speak out. And I went to an outskirt of Gumbo Sherikat last Sunday, where I found there really cases of gender-based violence, particularly in rape, where there are women who are really afraid to speak. And these are women whose farms have been confiscated by armed men, and they have been frightened to go to their farms because whenever they go, they find these people, rape them, and they go silent, not speaking about them. And now, before I get to actually hearing more from you, what your reaction is to such a story, let me come to you, Kepa Dima. So what's your take on the 16 days of activism?
Thank you. As a South Sudanese man, this period actually gives me the opportunity to reflect at the level of violence against women in my country. I'm very cognizant that this is a global phenomenon, not only in South Sudan, but in many countries around the world, where women are actually being battered, they're being tortured, they're being exposed to unnecessary treatment, which is not a good practice at all. So this is a period that actually provides us with time to reflect on what is happening, particularly in our country, South Sudan, with a view to seeing what can be done to improve the status of women in this country. There is a saying that if you want to predict about the peacefulness of a country, look at the way it treats its women. So that is a very serious reflection. It has been proven the world over that the way we treat women actually reflects our overall status of peacefulness in the society. And that is something which I think is true in South Sudan.
How does this explain about South Sudan?
That's exactly what I'm saying. That seems to be true also in South Sudan. So I think this period of activism actually provides us with time to reflect, internalize what we need to do to change the status in this country. Not only within the period of 10 days, but actually asking ourselves, what is it that we need to do to change the status quo so that we don't have to be only reflecting on these issues within this window of 10 days also. But we should be throughout the year reflecting and seeing what we need to do to improve the status of women in South Sudan.
Right. Maybe on your assessment, how are men contributing to gender-based violence in our society, in this case, South Sudan?
Well, I mean, that's a fantastic question, Memo. And as my colleague Kepa has mentioned, it's really critical, and this is the theme that the U.S. government has chosen to highlight this year, which is engaging men and boys to end gender-based violence. And as Jill has mentioned, it's a societal issue. This is not just men are bad and so men need to take action. This is a whole of society issue that we need to acknowledge, recognize, create sensitivity around, and address some of the root problems. But getting to your question, there are a lot of things that we as a society, South Sudanese as a society, because women are complicit in it, grandmothers are complicit in it, men, husbands, sons, daughters. It is a universal phenomenon, and we each play a part either by action or inaction. And so I think there are roles for everyone. But our focus this year from the USG is about what can men and boys do to counter this trend of gender-based violence. I think some of the issues that are prevalent, and I am not South Sudanese, but these are ones that have been explained to me, is that there is a perception that men can assert power over women, that men have a higher social status and role in society. Men can physically discipline a woman with impunity, for incorrect behavior. There's an expectation that women and girls don't have rights to inherit land, that having a boy child is better than a female child, for example, that women are not attending school or not encouraged to pursue their educations and are instead pressured to stay home and take care of family. So there are a lot of ways that society is contributing to this trend of gender inequality that's fundamental that gives rise to opportunity for violence against women.
And Jill Morris, what's your take?
Thank you. Yeah, Haven touched on a lot of the points I wanted to highlight, but I'll reiterate a few of them. As an optimist, I see the role of men and boys as well as women and girls as change agents. And we need to see the positive things of what peace and nonviolence can bring for say, a man himself as an individual, but also for his wife, his mother, his daughters, his sisters, his family, and the community, to see what the positive side of nonviolence looks like. And I think a lot of people don't know their rights. I think a lot of people also don't necessarily see that gender-based violence is more than physical violence. As Haven said, there are a lot of things that are like forced marriage, child marriage. A lot of people don't see that as gender-based violence. People don't see emotional or psychological violence as gender-based violence. People don't see the fact that women and girls can't inherit land in many areas, or that they're not able to go to school as gender-based violence. So I think raising awareness for everybody on this is really important, because once people start seeing the benefits for the females in their family as well as themselves, and how positive interaction and the opposite of violence being peace is good for everyone, hopefully this will start bringing about change. But people have to believe it. And this is something that we need to do, the civil society and USAID, is we have to start really getting folks and showing and getting them to believe how a positive society and a violent-free society is a much better way to go.
Anything you want to add on, Dima?
Yeah, sure. Just a quick one. I think most of the points have been highlighted. But I just want to say that most often when you talk about violence against women, a lot of people associate that with the current conflict situation in the country. But do you know that the real risk actually for most women lies right at their homes, with their relatives, with their close family members? And this is related in so many incidences, like issues of early child marriage, forced marriages. These are family members who are forcing their girls into these kind of practices, which is against the rights of these individuals. And I think really for us to be able to change this narrative, we as men, we actually need to be part of the discussion, the dialogue, and ensure that we actually play a very critical role in changing the narrative, the mindset, the norms, traditional and cultural norms that have been practiced for centuries. Yes, we are not saying that these customs and traditions are bad, but we really need to examine them and see, to retain the good ones, and where there is need for adapting new approaches to handling modern situations, we need to. Otherwise, we'll be perpetuating some inhuman practices. One of the biggest problems is the issue of masculinity. In the South Sudanese community, men are perceived to be superior by virtue of them being men. But really, we would want to encourage positive masculinity, where both men and women co-share in responsibilities in decision-making at the level of the household. So I think that is a very important narrative that we really need to work on collectively, both men and women, girls and boys together.
You mentioned something important about getting rid of some of these social norms that are actually hindrance to ending violence against women. So what are some of the ways you think that men can be engaged to address these harmful practices? Maybe haven't you have a view on this?
I do. I mean, some of it has already been said. I think Kepa's points are really excellent. But we need to raise awareness, and men and boys need to take action. They need to be vocal. They need to be vocal advocates, because again, this is a societal problem. This has to do about attitudes of gender, roles. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? And I think it's really important that men need to understand that an individual's power or identity does not come from subjugating someone else or from oppressing someone else. And I think so we need to think about some of these values and how we interact. And as I alluded earlier, support your sisters and your daughters and your nieces when they want to seek an education. Make sure that they have free and equal access to healthcare, and they have rights and opportunities to make educated decisions about their bodies and about their health. Make sure that they're entering into marriages of their own free will, not very young, because these can have very important and damaging health impacts for young girls if they're getting married, too young and without sufficient safeguards in place. Also, it's about economic empowerment and making sure that girls and women have rights and opportunities to seek employment, outside of the home, outside of, conventional roles. It's only through that sort of economic equality that we're going to see more social inclusion and gender equality.
So how is USAID been involved in efforts to actually support, other organizations in ending violence against women?
Sure, and I'll let my colleagues speak to that as well. But again, as I've mentioned, in public health, USAID, a lot of our providers train healthcare providers, first responders on how to make appropriate inquiry of women or victims of gender-based violence, how to report those incidents, and how to provide appropriate care. We also provide training to female sex workers who disproportionately, are victims of gender-based violence. We work with law enforcement authorities to remind them of their responsibilities to victims of gender-based violence who decide to come forward and make reports. USAID partners work to provide psychosocial counseling and empowerment of victims on how to mitigate and prevent reoccurrence of these attitudes. But again, it's not just about what we can do in the context of our activities, which touch on, maybe a few million people across the country. It's really this change. The reason we're focusing this year on working through men and boys is because it has to come from society. In order to be sustainable change, it has to come from within.
Jill Morris, Sajja Salam is USAID implementing partner, and I'm wondering how your organization works with other actors to encourage men to contribute towards reduction of gender-based violence.
So we've just hit just above our 6-month mark, and so we're slowly getting into our activities and working more with the communities. I would say that one of the most powerful mechanisms is working through our civil society partners. So we work with civil society partners that some are really grassroots, maybe don't have a lot of skills, maybe aren't capable of managing big, heavy budgets and with rules and regulations, but they're really touched in tune with their communities. So we're able to work with civil society groups that are really grassroots and all the way up the line, and really empowering them to work with communities and talk openly with communities about the dangers and negative effects of gender-based violence. And again, I think we've all touched on it, that awareness is a big thing. A lot of people aren't aware of even the definition sometimes of what gender-based violence is, the broad definition. And some people, again, don't see that not allowing their children, especially girl children, to not go to school or early marriage is a form of gender-based violence. So awareness is really important. And as Kappa and the mission director both said, it's really important to start from the community level. And we're doing a lot of awareness raising, especially for this period of the 16 Days of Activism. Something else I think that's really important is there's a lot of trauma in society here. I'm not South Sudanese, but I really try and speak with as many people as possible and understand. And we've been working with trauma awareness for quite some time, and realize that a lot of people are affected by a lot of negative things, including gender-based violence, and trauma is widespread across the country. And one of the things is breaking the cycle of violence. And so when people are aware of what trauma is and how it affects themselves, how it affects their interactions with their own families and the communities, and realize that if they're able to break this cycle of violence, that they can find a positive way to move forward, that's a really positive tool. And so we're starting our trauma awareness activities in many of the counties where we are, so that we're able to touch both men and women, boys and girls. We're working with traditional authorities as well to make sure that they're aware of the negative effects of gender-based violence, and trying to work with them as well to change some of the negative societal roles. And again, as Kevin said, culture is really important to everybody, and we want to just better understand it and see what we can do to shift some of the really negative parts of the culture, and really touch on and celebrate the good parts of culture.
Right, thanks, Jill. And Kepa, one of the ways you are trying to see is in the case of ending gender-based violence, is actually supporting South Sudanese, including women, through what we call resilience in agriculture. And what I've seen, I've found out, for instance, east of Gumbo Sherikat, women said they have abandoned their farms because of insecurity. They can't even access their farms when they go. As I alluded earlier, they are raped or beaten up by armed people. And I'm wondering, from what you have been doing, whether you're seeing any impact. As Haven has mentioned about agriculture, empowering women is also another way. of bringing them up equally with men. So what do you say?
Thanks, Lasuba. RAS, which stands for Resilience Through Agriculture in South Sudan, has just started out about a month and a half ago.
Oh, really?
So in real essence, we're not yet down on the ground in our targeted areas. We are still setting up and we'll be rolling out very soon. But our overall strategy is to work in 13 counties across 5 states in South Sudan. And our focus is going to be on increased agricultural production, utilization of food through nutritional trainings and awareness creation, and also we will be working on enhancing livelihoods. But all these activities that I've mentioned are not going to be undertaken without considering the aspects of gender. Gender is going to be one of our key embedded aspects, actually cross-cutting across all the objectives that I've just mentioned. And we will be working in building families, individuals, and communities at large to be able to build their resilience capacities, not only in terms of reacting to the shocks and responding to what has been happening, but also building responsive families where families are working together, both men and women, where they are shouldering responsibilities equally in terms of parenting, education, health, and so forth. So this program, we believe, will actually have a very positive impact on the lives of people in the target areas in South Sudan.
Before I get to Havens, let me come to you, Jill. So how can practitioners work with women as gatekeepers to shift what is considered as acceptable gender and social norms to contribute towards GBV reduction? So can you share with us some examples of engagement in this front?
I will shift the question a little bit. I think we need to look at it. We mentioned it before, not just about women and girls, but also men and boys. And so I think it's really important to work with society as a whole and focus different things with different genders. But I think if we don't find ways to target men and target boys and understand where they're coming from and what we can do and get them to understand some of the positive ways forward, we're not going to succeed as a group in trying to change mentalities. So it's really looking at it from an entire community perspective. I think we've really got to focus on rights and make sure that people understand what the rights are. So again, human rights in general, but what that means as well, specifically for girls and women who often have rights violated. And again, it's looking at it at education, it's looking from health, it's looking at it from livelihood, from inheritance. There's so many things that need to be looked at. And again, we're working a lot with traditional authorities. I mentioned that earlier on, but it's a really important group of people that we're working with to try and shift the cultural norms, also to make sure that they're able to adjudicate cases and have the tools and knowledge to be able to do that, whether it's through the legal system or through the traditional system, that they also have the power and the skills to be able to work with communities so that there's also justice being served for some of the cases, or is hopefully all of the cases, but little by little moving that forward.
If I could add just one point to what Jill is saying and to your question about what partners are doing and what programs are doing to sort of help address gender-based violence. I think the fundamental theme that we try to do in agriculture is about gender inclusion, and in our civic engagement and peace-building programs is to promote a fundamental philosophy that violence is not the answer to how we resolve conflict. And I think this is a basis that we look at in the 2018 Arxis peace agreement. I mean, we cannot have sustainable peace in this country if we continue to act violently against one another. That includes men, but that also includes women. And importantly, women play a role, or violence against women plays a significant role in perpetuating the types of violence that we see, whether it's cattle raiding that's based on bride price, which is based on, in many cases, early marriage. I mean, it comes back to women and the sensibility that, oh, well, this is my property, and to be a man, I need to have a woman and a wife. And so many of these norms feed into a cycle of violence. And I think the message we're trying to get out to men and boys in particular is, let's stop this. Let's find different avenues to, seek a life partner. Let's find different ways to elevate the roles of women, bring them into the family as, not as property or something to be controlled, but as equal contributing partners. And that way we can raise everyone up together.
Anything you want to supplement?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to just add to what they've just said, that indeed this exercise requires change in the norms, the way we perceive women, the way we perceive girls. And we recognize that changing norms in a society is not an easy thing, because these are deeply rooted, aspects that needs, really time and a lot of approaches to be able to uproot it. And that's very critical. It has to be done. Otherwise, we will not be able to create any change that we wanted. And from our learning experience that we had in a number of USAID, thanks to USAID for the good support that we're giving to different IPs in this country, is that one of the approaches actually to ensure that we encourage both men and women to work together. Because that working together in different project activities actually tends to break down the barriers in terms of looking at men as men and women as different from them. Because they will be interacting with each other, they will be working together, they will be supporting each other. So that lessens the resistance, in terms of how they view women. The other aspect is actually also involving girls and boys, to build gender, talent, gender abilities to be able to correlate, to co-work, with people from different genders. So that enhances our resilience strategy to enhance, women, men working together collaboratively.
Thanks a lot for that. And what lessons can be learned from successful local initiatives supported by USAID in South Sudan in engaging men to end gender-based violence? You've heard from your implementing partners what they're doing. There are not many months now since they started.
Sure. I mean, I think we've touched on a lot of those themes, but again, raising awareness is key. I mean, this is not something secret. This is not something to be ignored. This is not something to be sort of denied. There needs to be awareness. There needs to be acceptance and acknowledgement that the way we treat men and boys is not the same way that we value girls and women in this society. And this is not specific to South Sudan. This is a global phenomenon. That is why it's the International Day of Elimination of Violence Against Women. This is an international global phenomenon, and it is a serious problem here, but also everywhere, including the United States. I think what we're trying to do through a lot of our programs is work with communities, as Jill has mentioned, raise awareness to try to empower women and girls appropriately through agricultural production, other means, access to education, also reporting, working with local authorities. Government does have a role. Communities do have a role. But it's not all about, men with guns. If there is violence at a water collection point, it has to do with what are our mentalities? What is our, there's something that's telling young people, oh, that's girls' work. So, boys won't do it, or young men won't do it. But we have the power to stop that violence. So, I think it's just how we conceptualize a lot of, when we talk about gender, it's not about your sexual identity in terms of your, your physical, attributes. It has to do with the society's definition of what it means to be a man or a woman. And I think that's where we've all alluded to needs to do some changing. Where is it written that a man or a boy can't tend to, sheep or goats, or that a woman couldn't tend to cattle? I mean, it's those types of artificial cultural divisions that put women and girls at risk. Where is it written that a boy can't go collect water, or to do other activities, or to help in the home, to clean, to cook, to do these other things? And so if we think about our sense of family, our sense of community, and as a society, where are the vulnerabilities that put women and girls at risk? We have the power to take individual action and make those changes.
So what would be your last remarks? Maybe I start with you, Jill Morris, having discussed and what needs really to be done to end gender-based violence against women in South Sudan. So what would be your last remarks and probably message?
I would say, first off, again, what I started with, I think survivors of gender-based violence need to feel supported, need to feel like they're not alone, that there's someone standing with them, behind them, beside them, and it's okay to talk about it, that they're encouraged to talk about it, that there are people supporting them on one side. And I would say on the other side, we've spoken about it a lot, but it's really raising awareness of rights, raising awareness of what gender-based violence can look like. There are many different forms of gender-based violence. And as well, finding champions. Don't be complicit. Be able to speak out against something that you see. I know that's a really hard thing to do, especially in some areas of the country, because it might not be supported by the wider community, but to try and find a way, to find the courage to be able to speak up for something that you see that isn't right. And that we need to work, and we're working through USAID, the government, civil society. We need to work together with boys and girls, with men and women, with leaders to make this change and slowly by surely identify ways that we can move forward in peace. Without that, it's going to be very hard to change people's mindset in some of these negative cultures.
Thanks, Jill Morris and Kepa Dima.
Thank you. As a South Sudanese man and a father of boys and girls, I would say the best starting point is to start young and at home. As a parent, we must actually try to raise our kids, both girls and boys, in a way that reflects the values that we are promoting in this program. And to ensure that we treat them equally, like what Heaven has said, there's nothing wrong in a boy going to fetch water. There's nothing wrong in a girl going to look after the cattle. So really, we should try to inculcate into our children, and I hope the South Sudanese men are listening out there, that we raise up children who are going to be adults who have the values of respect for both men and women.
That's an interesting example, using yourself as a cause for change. And personally, I should also share my experience that I'm also married. I am always impressed to see my son going to cook for the mother and preparing her bed.
That's right.
And the daughter on the other side is also doing some other things, same job in the house. I think very interesting hearing such a story. It is a beginning. I will see in decades to come that things will be different than we see today. So what would be your last remark?
Well, thank you, Lasuba, again for the opportunity for me to be here and both of my colleagues. I think I just want to emphasize that, among all the points that we've emphasized today, the real commitment to ending gender-based violence is not about 16 days or 2 weeks a year. It's a daily process. It's every week, every day, every year. It requires positive behavior change, such as some of the examples that Kepa and Jill have given. It starts in the family. It starts with ourselves as individuals, and then it will radiate out through society. It also is really important that we break the cycle of violence ourselves. If you see something, speak up. Don't remain silent and say, "Oh, that's a personal issue. Oh, that's a family issue." No, speak up in our communities as we really need to do. Certainly in your home, certainly in your community. Third, I would say we must value women and girls as full participants in our society, as students, as educators, as healthcare providers, as professionals, as elected government leaders, and as wage earners, as peacemakers and heads of household. And only then, when we truly value those contributions, will we treat them equally as they should be. And finally, I would just conclude by saying gender-based violence is not a women's issue. The right to be free from violence is universal, and it's a human right.
Thank you, Chris Hubbard, USAID's South Sudan Mission Director, and also Jill Morris, Chief of Party, that is Shaja Salam in English, Support Peace, USAID Implementing Partner. I also do appreciate your coming. Kepa Dima, Deputy Chief of Party Resilience to Agriculture in South Sudan, USAID Implementing Partner. It's been wonderful having all of you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much.
And to you, the viewer, thank you for watching this. You can follow us on subscribe to our YouTube, ITV South Sudan. From me to you, thank you for watching.